My own son tossed my suitcase into the rain and screamed, I was nothing but a burden. At 42, I found myself trembling under an overpass. My dignity was washed away by the storm. I felt abandoned, as if all the years I'd sacrificed for his upbringing had been erased in a single night. But fate had other plans, and when my sister found me there, everything changed. They thought I would stay silent, remain broken. Instead, a storm of truth was brewing, and it would destroy their lies forever.
My suitcase hits the pavement with a wet, heavy thud. The rain wouldn't stop.
It poured down as if the heavens were angry at me. My son stood in the doorway, arms crossed, his face filled with disgust. This time, he didn't scream. He didn't need to. The silence between us said everything. He had made his decision. I no longer had a place in his house or his life. I didn't beg. I picked up my suitcase, already soaked, as I reached the sidewalk. My slippers squeaked with each step as I walked out into the storm. No umbrella, no coat, just a sweater that had been warm 2 hours ago. Behind me, the door slammed shut. That sound stayed with me longer than I care to admit. I didn't cry that night. Instead, I walked until my legs gave out. I found a low concrete wall under the overpass, right off the main road. It wasn't safe. It wasn't dry, but it was hidden. I pulled my drenched suitcase under me, leaned against the wall, and listened to the sound of tires splashing through puddles. My body ached, but not as much as my chest. My bones felt like paper, and my heart felt like ash. A few people passed by, no one looked twice. To them, I was just another homeless woman in a city full of homeless people. That was the part that scared me the most. I didn't feel like myself anymore. I felt invisible, discarded. I kept hearing his voice in my head, the way he said the word burden, as if I were a chore, as if the years I had raised him had never happened. I remembered the scraped knees I had kissed, the meals I had skipped so he could eat. And now, in his eyes, I was just a weight. The wind grew colder the longer I sat. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, one I had found in my suitcase, thin and damp. My body still trembled, not just from the cold but from shame, from disbelief. Perhaps some of you understand this feeling, when the people you have given everything to look at you as if you are nothing. I didn't sleep much that night. I listened to the cars, the sirens, the sound of something breaking inside me. Around 4 in the morning, the rain eased. I was just drifting off when I heard footsteps. Not hurried, not heavy, but measured. I looked up and for a second, I thought I was dreaming. Amaya, my younger sister. Her hair was drenched, her makeup gone, but she looked at me as if she hadn't seen me in 20 years. And perhaps, in a way, she hadn't. We hadn't talked much after she moved to Texas. Life got in the way. Family matters, complicated things, but there she was. Standing before me like a miracle, wrapped in a trench coat and fury. At first, she said nothing. She simply knelt beside me, brushed the wet hair from my face, and placed her hand on mine. And that was it. That was the first real human touch I had felt in weeks, maybe months. She wordlessly helped me to my feet, took my suitcase, and led me to her rental car, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. No questions, no judgment. I sat in her car, the heater on full blast, a blanket draped over my shoulders, trying not to break down. She handed me a thermos of tea, still warm. It smelled of honey and mint. I took a sip and felt the first spark of safety since I had left that house. We didn't speak until we were on the highway. "You're coming with me," she said. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I couldn't imagine going anywhere else. She didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. I think she saw it in my face, in the way I held the tea with both hands, as if it were all I had left in the world. The road stretched long and silent. Every few miles, I glanced at her. The same determined eyes, the same straight back. Amaya had always been fire where I was water. She burned when people hurt her. I endured, I survived. But that night, I began to wonder if survival was enough. When we reached the motel outside Portland, she gave me a room key and a bag of clean clothes. I took a hot shower, the first in days, scrubbing off the rain, the dirt, the humiliation. I stared at myself in the mirror until the steam blurred my face. Then I slept, not deeply, not peacefully, but I slept in a bed. And the next morning, when she said we were driving to Kennebunkport, I didn't ask why. I just followed, because something in me had shifted. Not all at once, not loudly, but enough to feel it. Perhaps you felt it too, that quiet turning, the moment you realize this time, I won't let it go. This time, I won't just swallow my pain to keep the peace. Not when it costs me everything. If someone you love has ever treated you like trash. If you've ever had to pick yourself up off the floor with nothing but pride and aching joints, then perhaps you'll understand what I did next. And believe me, it won't be pretty, but it will be just. The next morning came quickly. I opened my eyes to a low motel ceiling and the steady hum of the air conditioner. The bed beneath me was too firm, the sheets scratchy, but compared to concrete and rain, it felt like heaven. My muscles ached from the night before, but my hands were warm for the first time in days. I sat up slowly, wrapping the motel blanket around my shoulders. I wasn't home, but I was somewhere. That was enough. Amaya was already dressed, packing her things. She moved quickly, focused, as if she had been planning something all night. She didn't ask how I had slept. She didn't make small talk, just took my suitcase and said, "We need to go." I followed her to the parking lot. The sky was pale blue, the air thick and damp, the way the Maine coast air always smells before noon. I slid into the passenger seat, and as soon as the doors closed, she put the car in gear.
Noch es etastin.
10 minutes later, she pulled into a gas station, left the engine running, and told me to wait. She came back with a thermos of fresh coffee, a breakfast pastry, and a folder. She handed me the folder first. Inside was a printout for a property listing, a condo in Kennebunkport, 2 bedrooms, ocean view, fully furnished. The price made my stomach clench. I looked at her, and she finally spoke again. "This place is yours. I bought it this morning." I said nothing, couldn't. My mouth hung open for a few seconds before I managed to close it. My hands clutched the folder as if it might break. Amaya kept her eyes on the road. "I've already wired the money. It's in your name.
No mortgage, no tricks."
I flipped through. There were photos, a balcony overlooking the ocean, a kitchen with granite countertops, a guest room with a desk. It looked like a place someone would spend 2 weeks every summer, not a place someone like me would live full-time. But I kept flipping. On the last page was a bank receipt, a deposit into a new savings account. $5 million. I looked up. Amaya didn't bat an eye. "Your savings, just yours. I've been putting it aside for you for years. You didn't know because I didn't tell you. Now you do." I leaned back, the folder on my lap, the coffee forgotten. My ears rang as if someone had set off fireworks in my chest. I couldn't form a complete thought, not a single one. The numbers were on the page, too big to ignore, too surreal to believe. She drove back onto the highway. Neither of us said anything for a while. I watched the landscape rushing by. Commercial districts, pine forests, cheap diners. Things looked normal, but nothing felt normal. Something had shifted inside me, and I couldn't yet tell if it was gratitude or shame. She turned onto a quieter, tree-lined, narrow road. After a few blocks, we passed a guarded driveway. She entered a code, and the iron gate slowly slid open. A security guard waved us through, and Amaya nodded back. I continued to stare straight ahead. The building was low, cream-colored with white-trimmed balconies and blue tile roofs. It looked like a postcard. Amaya parked in a reserved spot near the entrance. She took my suitcase from the trunk and carried it inside without waiting. The lobby smelled of lemon and new carpet. A woman at the reception desk smiled and handed Amaya a welcome packet. Amaya silently pointed to me. The woman looked at me kindly, the way people look at stray dogs they'd like to help. We rode the elevator in silence. On the 3rd floor, Amaya unlocked the door to apartment 3C and pushed it open. It was brighter than I expected. The walls were a soft beige, the couch a pale gray. Light streamed through the glass sliding doors leading to the balcony. I walked to the railing and looked out. The ocean stretched to the horizon. I could hear it. Steady, heavy, alive. Behind me, Amaya set down the suitcase, wiped her hands and said, "This is where you live now, and I'll be staying in the apartment across the hall for a while. So don't even think about disappearing. I turned around, my hands still on the railing. I wanted to say thank you, but the words felt insufficient. Instead, I nodded slowly. Amaya came closer. I know what he did. I know what they did. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, but you're not going to let them take anything else from you. Ever again. She looked me in the eyes. Her tone was sharp, not sentimental. This place is yours, this money is yours. And I've already contacted Rosalie. That got my attention. Rosalie Vance, her lawyer friend from college. Smart, ruthless, cautious. I hadn't seen her in years. Rosalie is drafting the documents. Financial freezes, legal protections. Whatever you don't want revealed stays sealed. And whatever they try to take, will be 2 steps ahead. I exhaled slowly. My fingers gripped the balcony edge tighter. Amaya's voice softened. You're not a guest here. You're not dependent. You are the owner, and I need you to start acting like one. I stood there long after she left. The ocean didn't stop moving, nor did the thoughts in my head. Dawson thought he had buried me, that I would quietly rot away in some homeless shelter. He thought shame would silence me. He had no idea I was about to bury him with the very things he had tried to steal. 3 days after I moved in, Amaya threw a small welcome party at the clubhouse downstairs. She didn't ask if I wanted one. She just texted me the time and told me to wear something blue. She had already bought me 2 new outfits and hung them in the closet. I chose the one with long sleeves, a light fabric that didn't draw attention but made me feel like myself again. I arrived a few minutes early. The room was softly lit, with finger foods on white platters and a view of the ocean through a wall of glass windows. About a dozen people were there, mostly other residents of the building, retired couples, a few widows, an older man who reminded me of my late husband, though he was thinner and had a sharper chin. I didn't remember most of their names, but I recognized their warmth, the kind that doesn't ask too much too soon. Amaya made sure I stayed near her. She introduced me with just enough detail to be polite, without ever drifting into the personal. She never mentioned what had happened. Never mentioned Dawson, just told people I had come to Kennebunkport for a fresh start and was now officially part of the community. Her voice had that firm tone she used when setting boundaries. As she mingled, I found myself at the other end of the room, near the window, watching the light fade over the water. I was content not to speak. I didn't want to explain myself to strangers. It was enough to be in a safe place, surrounded by people who didn't know what I had been through. That changed when one of the building's security guards came through the side door. Not for the party, just on patrol. He appeared to be in his late 20s. Broad shoulders, short-cropped gray hair, a badge pinned to his polo shirt. He made a slow circuit of the lobby, then paused when he saw me near the fruit bowl. I nodded politely. He came over. He pointed to the apartment number on my name tag. 3C. That's across from Ms. Amaya's unit, right? I said it was. He smiled.
She's sharp. 2 Miss A Detail.
You have a good person looking out for you. I agreed. He glanced toward the elevator, then lowered his voice a little. You might want to keep an eye on the hallway traffic. We had a report of someone loitering near the mailboxes late last night. Didn't match any resident profile, just for your information. That tightened something in my chest. I thanked him, resolving to tell Amaya. She probably already knew. Nothing escaped her. A few minutes later, Amaya raised her glass and tapped it with a spoon. The room fell silent. She offered a brief toast. Simply said she was glad I was here and that second chances were worth celebrating. People clapped, someone whistled, and then things returned to normal. But I noticed that when she finished her speech, her eyes darted to the door. She had seen it open. I turned and saw them too. Dawson and Myla. He wore a shirt he rarely ironed, but this time it was crisp. Myla was dressed in beige and gold, her hair curled. Their heels clicked softly as they entered the room. They smiled as if they belonged. My stomach knotted. Amaya walked straight toward them. I didn't hear what she said, but her face made it clear they weren't invited. She didn't raise her voice, she didn't make a scene, but she blocked their path like a glass wall. Dawson looked over her shoulder at me, smiling as if none of this had happened, as if he hadn't last seen me in the rain, screaming, clinging to my dignity like a dying flame. I said nothing. My hand clenched the edge of the refreshment table. Amaya signaled someone, and a staff member stepped up. The conversation was brief. Dawson and Mila stood for a few more seconds, then turned and left. Mila didn't even glance back. The room slowly returned to its rhythm. People noticed the interruption, but no one asked questions. For that, I was grateful. Amaya came back to my side, took a piece of fruit from the tray, and said, "I told you they'd come." I nodded. She had warned me earlier that morning, having seen a comment from one of Mila's friends online, something too specific to be accidental. Amaya was already 3 moves ahead. After the party ended, she walked me upstairs. We said goodnight in the hallway, and I slipped into my apartment. Inside, I sat on the edge of the sofa, not waiting for anything specific. I was just waiting. They hadn't come to apologize, not to explain. They came to see what else they could get. But now they knew. I wasn't where they had left me. I wasn't the woman who had walked out into the storm with her suitcase. I was inside, protected, and no longer alone. Still, I didn't feel safe enough to rest. So I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the side drawer of the hallway cabinet and pulled out a new notebook Amaya had given me. I clicked a pen and wrote a sentence at the top of the page. "What you took from me, you will return." Then I drew a line beneath it and wrote 3 words, home, name, power. The party was over, the curtain had risen, and they had stepped onto the stage, thinking they still controlled the story. But I now held the pen, and I would write the rest.
Amaya wasted no time.
2 days after the party, she knocked on my door promptly at 10 a.m., with a stack of envelopes in one hand and her tablet in the other. Her hair was pulled back tightly, and her expression told me the time for gentle warnings was over. She laid everything on the kitchen counter and opened the top folder. "They'll try again," she said, "but this time not with charm. It will be legal." I watched as she spread the pages one after another. Letters, emails, screenshots, digital dust that Dawson and Mila had left from their recent activities. Amaya had quietly paid a private investigator to monitor any financial or legal move involving my name. What she found was subtle but unmistakable. Dawson had contacted a small law firm in another state, inquiring about transferring powers of attorney and elder care authorizations. Mila had messaged someone on an online platform about hiring a mobile notary to witness documents at home. Amaya tapped one of the papers. "They'll make it look official, personally delivered. They think you're soft enough to sign something if they arrive in tears." She looked at me steadily. "I need you to do exactly what I say." I didn't argue. Not because I was afraid, but because I now understood something I hadn't fully accepted before. This wasn't about misunderstandings or distance. This was about control. Dawson and Mila didn't want to help me. They wanted what they thought I no longer deserved to manage. So I told Amaya, yes, I would follow her lead. That afternoon, we invited a few neighbors over for coffee. Nothing formal, just a casual afternoon with fruit platters and pastries. Enough people to create a social environment without arousing suspicion. Amaya told the concierge to let Dawson and Mila up if they showed up. She hadn't invited them, but she made sure someone would let them in. Then she slid a recording device under the end table next to the sofa and sat down, as if we were waiting for a change in the weather. It took less than 20 minutes. Dawson knocked. Amaya didn't flinch. I opened the door. He smiled as if we were long-lost friends. Mila stood behind him, holding a gift bag with gold tissue paper. She wore pale pink and pearls. They had rehearsed this.
Dawson steppet in first.
Loud greetings, jokes about stopping by since they were in the area. Mila placed the bag on the table and pulled out a tin of homemade cookies. I said, "Thank you," emotionlessly. Amaya watched quietly from her chair. After 5 minutes of superficial chatter, Dawson leaned forward, hands clasped. "I brought something for you to look at," he said. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a stapled document. The title page read in bold, Family Wellness and Property Agreement. Amaya glanced at the title and crossed her legs. Dawson slid the papers across the table to me. Just something to make things smoother, so we can help. You know, coordinate medical stuff, ease the process if anything urgent happens. He smiled again, too long, too forced. I picked up the first page and read it in silence. It was 6 pages long. In the middle was a paragraph titled Temporary Power of Attorney Authorization, followed by another titled Financial Oversight Clause. The language was cautious, not overtly predatory, but it gave Dawson full access to act on my behalf in medical and financial matters. It also authorized him to open and manage joint access bank accounts. I put the paper down. I didn't speak. Amaya stood up. She went into the kitchen, pulled out a second folder, and returned. From it, she extracted an almost identical document. Only this one had a red line through the middle. This is a copy of the version you drafted last week with that paralegal in Burlington, Vermont, she said to Dawson. The original email has a timestamp. The language is identical, word for word. Dawson's face stiffened. Myla remained silent. Amaya turned to me. Ask them what this is really for. I didn't have to. The silence said everything. Amaya opened the recording app on her tablet and let it play. Then she raised her voice just enough for the neighbors to hear. I want everyone to know, she said, that this document was designed to strip Daniela of her financial rights under the guise of assistance. This is what familial manipulation looks like. Dawson stood up quickly. You don't understand what we're trying to do, he said. Myla grabbed his arm. Amaya remained calm. No, I understand perfectly. And so does the state of Maine, and so does the ethics committee. And so does the community you're trying to impress with false tears and cookies. Dawson's voice broke. You're making a scene. Amaya laughed once, sharply. A scene? No, this is clarity. She turned to me and nodded. I walked to the table, took the contract they had brought, and tore it in half. The room fell silent. The neighbors stopped talking. Dawson looked at me with something I hadn't seen in years. Fear. I didn't scream, I didn't curse. I simply held up the torn pages and said, this is what happens when you mistake silence for weakness. Amaya gestured toward the door. Dawson and Myla left, this time without looking back. I sat down slowly, my hands still warm from the paper. Amaya brought me a glass of water. The neighbors murmured, then politely excused themselves. When the room was empty, Amaya spoke softly, they'll try something else. I nodded. I knew that too. But what they didn't know was that we now had the upper hand. And I wasn't just holding my ground, I was ready to reclaim everything, piece by piece, name by name, and this time, they would never see it coming. 3 mornings after I tore up their contract, I opened my front door and found a white orchid on the doormat. No card, no note, just the plant, delicate and perfect. Like a silent apology that didn't have the courage to knock. I stood there for a long time, not picking it up. The air was warm, the hallway quiet. Across the hall, Amaya's door opened. She stepped out, a cup of coffee in one hand, her phone in the other. She saw the orchid and paused. They're changing their tactics, she said, without batting an eye. I nodded once and left the plant where it was. I stepped back inside, locked the door, and let the silence settle. That evening, they came again, this time not together. Dawson showed up around 6 in a blue polo shirt I remembered buying him for a job interview he never got. His smile was softer than usual. He carried a small paper bag from the Italian restaurant on Main Street, saying he thought I hadn't eaten dinner yet. I didn't open the screen door. He stood there for a while, told me I looked good. Asked if I liked the neighborhood. Said he and Myla had talked, that they were terribly sorry. How things had escalated. Said he missed me. I said nothing. Finally, he left the bag on the bench against the wall and walked away. I watched him go, without moving. The next morning, it was Myla's turn. She showed up just before noon with a shopping bag and a book under her arm. Her tone was lighter, almost casual, as if this was something she always did. She didn't mention the contract. She didn't mention the party. Just said she wanted to stop by, maybe help with errands, cook something if I was tired. She used to call me by my first name. That day, she called me Mom. I watched her through the peephole until she left. She took the groceries with her, but left the book. A week passed like this. One would come, then the other, sometimes with food, sometimes with flowers. Once, a framed photo of Dawson as a boy, holding a fishing rod next to me on a pier. A memory they thought could be used as a weapon. I didn't respond, but I watched and recorded. Amaya had given me a small device, no bigger than a car key. It sat by the door, always on when anyone came near. I didn't use it to catch them doing anything criminal. I used it to capture the tone, the hesitation, the patterns. Because their words weren't about making amends, they were about access. Every conversation revolved around comfort, concern, and finally, logistics, bills, accounts, end-of-life planning. The language of thieves disguised as caregivers. Amaya took the recordings and shared them with Rosalie. Rosalie didn't say much at first, just listened, took notes, asked about mail, emails, phone calls. Then something caught her attention. Dawson had requested a change of address for my bank correspondence. He had done it online using a phone number from years ago, once associated with my name. Rosalie found it through a soft scan she requested from a bank contact. It hadn't been processed yet, but it was a red flag. Amaya changed the mailbox locks the next day. The night after, the fire alarm in my hallway went off around 2 a.m. No fire, just a pulled lever. Knox, the guard, checked the camera and caught a blurry figure walking through the service corridor 20 minutes earlier. You couldn't see the face, but you could see the jacket, the same one Dawson wore to the party. I asked Amaya to call Rosalie again. She brought a laptop the next day and showed me how to set up secure digital notifications for every attempted access to my accounts, every login from an unknown device, every file request associated with my name. I agreed to everything. Then I asked her if she thought they were done. She didn't answer immediately. "They'll try it through the back door now," she finally said. I asked what that meant. She closed the laptop. "They'll try legally again, but not directly. They'll find someone else to do it for them. A notary, a mobile witness, a financial advisor who doesn't know the whole story." 2 days later, a man with car keys and a collared shirt knocked on my door. Said he was from an elder care planning group. Said my family had requested a quick review of my estate plan, just to make sure everything was in order. He smiled as if it were normal, as if women in their 70s regularly received surprise visits from polite strangers with clipboards and official-looking folders. I told him I already had a team and closed the door. He left quickly. The next morning, Rosalie filed a formal complaint with the appropriate probate court. Nothing dramatic, just enough to open a file, a trail. I knew what was happening. They were trying to make me look unstable, disorganized, vulnerable, because if they couldn't get me to sign, they would try to prove I was incapable of managing my affairs. I didn't talk about it with anyone, not even Amaya. But that night, I sat at my kitchen table and reread the property deed. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal. I whispered my name aloud, not for drama, but for clarity. Then I put the paper back in its folder, closed the drawer, and locked it. The doorbell rang once more that week. This time, Dawson brought wine. Myla waited by the elevator. He didn't ask to come in. He asked to talk. Said things were difficult. Said family should stick together. Said maybe we could talk about some practical things. I didn't open the door. I just spoke through the crack. "Don't come back." His voice broke, not with sadness, but with anger disguised as confusion. I didn't respond, I waited. He left. I went back into the kitchen, sat down, and made a list. 3 columns, what they tried, what failed, what would never be forgiven. I wasn't defending anything anymore. I was documenting, preparing. The storm was over, but the damage it left would serve as evidence, and I would be the one to bring it forward, piece by piece, until there was nothing left for them to claim. The knock came on a Tuesday afternoon, not hurried, not nervous, just steady enough to suggest familiarity. I was in the kitchen when I heard it. I didn't flinch. I walked slowly to the door, just as I had practiced with Amaya and Rosalie. I didn't open it immediately. I looked through the peephole. Dawson stood there, hands empty, no gifts, no folders, no food. That was a change. Behind him, Myla waited near the elevator, pretending not to look at the door. But I could see the angle of her shoulder. She was listening. I unlocked the door but left the chain latched. I didn't let him in. Dawson leaned slightly forward. I just wanted to see how you were doing, he said in a low voice. I remained silent. He continued. Things have been tense. And I get it. We crossed a line. Still. I said nothing. I just miss you. Myla does too. We're not proud of how we handled everything, but we want to make it right. We've talked. We thought maybe if we showed you we're here for you, you'd believe us. He pulled a small envelope from his back pocket and held it up. It's nothing legal. It's just something we wrote from the heart. I reached through the gap in the door and took the envelope. Then I closed the door without a word. Inside, I opened it slowly. 2 pages, handwritten. The tone was sweet, laced with guilt. Words like forgiveness, regret, rebuilding. Myla's handwriting was on the 2nd page. She mentioned she'd signed up for a caregiving course, that she wanted to be more helpful. She said, family was the only thing that mattered now. I folded the pages, placed them on the table, and pressed the button under the counter edge. The small recording device clicked on. It had been sitting there for days, waiting. I walked back to the door and opened it fully this time. Dawson turned around. A flicker of hope crossed his face. Come in, I said. He entered alone. I didn't greet him. I didn't smile. He sat at the far end of the sofa, adjusted his sleeves, looking around the room as if seeing it for the first time. This place is beautiful, he said. You've really settled in. I nodded once. He looked toward the hallway.
Myla's just downstairs.
She didn't want to pressure you.
Isa it noting.
Dawson leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Look, I know we messed up, and I know you'll probably never fully trust us again. But we're your family. We're not here to fight. We're here to fix things. He paused, letting the words hang.
I don't want your money. I just want peace.
I stood at the edge of the living room, watching him, letting the recorder capture every word. He kept talking. I know you've set up accounts, savings, property, all that. And that's great. That means you're safe. It just doesn't mean we can't be involved. You shouldn't have to manage everything alone. Then he changed his tone. I mean, what if something happens? A fall? A medical emergency? Don't you think it makes sense to have someone on file? Someone who can make a decision if you can't. I turned slightly toward the kitchen, letting him continue. I have papers.
It's simple.
Just lists us as emergency contacts. Nothing binding, nothing financial, just access to records so we can help.
That's all.
He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thin folder. This was the real reason he had come. I didn't move. He placed the folder on the coffee table, leaned back as if he had just offered something noble. You don't even have to look at it now. Just think about it. No pressure. I looked at the folder, pale blue. No markings on the outside. I finally spoke. Where is Myla right now? He hesitated. Downstairs in the car. Alone. He nodded. I walked to the balcony door and pulled back the curtain just slightly. She was there, leaning against the hood, on the phone.
I lese kurz Fall.
I picked up the folder, went into the kitchen, and threw it in the trash. When I returned to the living room, Dawson stood. I didn't mean to offend you, he said. I said nothing. I thought you'd appreciate the effort. Still nothing. I guess Amaya has really worked you over. That made me pause. I stepped closer. Amaya didn't do this, I said. You did. Dawson's jaw tightened. The mask slipped for a second. Then he stepped forward, trying to soften his face again. Please, just think about it. I interrupted him. I already have. I opened the door. He stood there for another moment, as if wanting to say something else, but he didn't. He walked out. I closed the door behind him and locked it. Then I turned off the recording device. 2 days later, Rosalie stopped by with a printed transcript. She added it to a folder that was already thick with statements, photos, logs of a clear timeline of pressure and manipulation. Each entry dated, each line consistent. They hadn't stopped. They had just changed their form. And now I had the proof. The next time they tried something, it wouldn't be a guessing game. It would be evidence, and it would be enough. When the envelope arrived, it came in a plain white package. No sender, no stamp, just slid under my door like a silent threat. I found it early in the morning, making tea, half asleep.
Slippers shuffling across the cool floor.
At first, I thought it might be another apology letter, or a card from one of the ladies in the book club. But the weight told me otherwise. It wasn't soft. It wasn't personal, it was stiff, heavy. Inside, it wasn't a letter. It was 6 printed, stapled pages. Each page filled with language designed to confuse, to intimidate. They had hired a lawyer, or at least they wanted me to think that. The letter claimed that Dawson and Mila were seeking a guardianship review due to health and safety concerns, that they had evidence of cognitive decline and were concerned for my well-being, that my recent financial decisions had been erratic and could pose a danger to me and others. I sat down slowly and read that line 3 times. It said my decisions were erratic. I, the woman who had managed the budget for an emergency clinic for over a decade, the one who settled bills and vendor disputes while my husband worked nights. The one who navigated 2 pensions through a market crash, and they called me unstable. I didn't cry, I laughed. Then I picked up the phone and called Amaya. By noon, Rosalie was at my door with a copy of the same letter, forwarded from Amaya's office. They had tried to send it there too, probably assuming she would panic or push me to give in. They didn't understand who Amaya was. Rosalie set her laptop on the counter and opened a document titled Protective Response Package. It was already in the works. Rosalie was just filling in the final pieces. Transcripts, photos, the audio recording of Dawson's visit, copies of the checks they had sent me weeks earlier with small notes in the memo line saying things like, "Just in case you need help deciding." Rosalie read the letter with practiced calm, pointing out phrases clearly derived from online legal templates. Some of the claims didn't even align with actual Maine law. It lacked specifics. Terms were misused. "They want to intimidate you," Rosalie said. "This isn't about your health, it's about control." I nodded. We didn't have to file anything yet, but Rosalie contacted a friend at the probate court to log the materials. Should anything actually come up, we would be ready. By the end of the day, Amaya had sent a formal reply, worded like a velvet glove, warm but firm, the kind of letter that doesn't just push back, it warns. And then I did something I hadn't planned. I called my doctor, not because I was concerned, but because I wanted records. I booked a full cognitive assessment and a wellness panel, scheduling the tests for the same week. I passed every single one of them. Blood pressure stable, reflexes quick, memory sharp, processing speed still faster than most people half my age. 2 days later, the results were in a folder in Rosalie's hands. I asked her to make 3 copies. I sent one to Dawson. No note, just the report. A week passed, then 2.
No calls, no visits, no letters under the door.
I thought for a second, maybe they had given up, but that was the mistake, because while I enjoyed the silence, they were busy elsewhere.
Amaya got the notification first.
She had set up a monitor through the county recorder's office. Every time a lien, an inquiry, or a dispute involving my name or address was filed, she would be notified. That's how we found out they had filed an application with the bank that held my savings account. They were trying to add themselves as co-beneficiaries. It wasn't a legal move. It was an attempt to fish for information. Mila had called pretending to be me, claiming to have forgotten her online access and asking to update the beneficiaries over the phone. The clerk reported it immediately. My age and my voice notes didn't match. The bank flagged the application and documented it, but they still tried. They didn't even care anymore how desperate they looked. I stared at the bank report for a long time that night. Not angry, just quiet. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about erasing me. They wanted my freedom, my dignity, my name on paper in ink next to theirs. Proof that they had power, that I needed them. Amaya and Rosalie arranged for the accounts to be legally sealed with third-party oversight. No new names, no beneficiaries. Everything would go to a foundation if anything happened to me. One I had quietly set up months ago. It wasn't about revenge. It was about ensuring no one could ever trap me again. Later that week, Rosalie handed me another envelope, thicker than the last. Inside were 2 signed affidavits from my former landlord and neighbors. Witnesses to the nights Dawson and Mila left me outside, refusing to open their door, telling the children I was being dramatic. There was also a notarized statement from the community nurse who had seen my bruises when I had fallen. She confirmed that no one from my family had picked me up from the emergency room. They wanted to build a case against me. I was already building a wall around myself. Stone by stone, paper by paper, truth by truth, and each page was sharper than the last. There was a line in Rosalie's summary that stuck with me. Attackers with superficial motives underestimate the power of a long memory. She was right. I remembered everything, and now the court would too, and the law, and soon so would they. The invitation came from Dawson. A simple text message, short and polite. He asked if I would be willing to come over for dinner next Sunday. Said the children missed me. Said they would like to start fresh. He ended the message with a hopeful line about family and forgiveness. I stared at it for a while, letting the words sink in. I knew what this was. I had seen it coming. Amaya had seen it. Rosalie had predicted it exactly. They had tried the legal pressure. That failed. The false guardianship attempt didn't land. The beneficiary trick was uncovered, and now came the charm offensive. Still, I agreed. I told him I would be there at 6. On Sunday, I wore a soft navy dress with a high collar and long sleeves. I pulled my hair back and wore my gold watch, which Archer had given me for our 25th wedding anniversary. I carried nothing but a slim envelope in my handbag and my calmest expression. The house hadn't changed. White facade, fresh mulch, a new wreath on the door, as if any of that could hide the bitterness that clung to the walls. Mila greeted me with a smile that was too wide. Her eyes scanned my outfit, trying to read it like a signal. She stepped aside, letting me in with a hand on my back, firm and controlling. The dining table was set for 7. Dawson sat at the head. The children were dressed smartly, their shirts too stiff for a Sunday. Their eyes darted between me and their parents. We sat, we ate. The food was good, a little too perfect. They talked about the children's grades, about how Dawson was considering a job change. Mila praised the dish she had made twice, with the kind of tone that demanded approval. I nodded politely, answered when asked. I didn't bring up anything from the past few months, and neither did they, not directly. But about halfway through dessert, Dawson leaned back in his chair and sighed. I've been doing a lot of thinking lately, he said, about how complicated things have become. And I know we've all made mistakes, but I hate the distance between us. Mila reached for his hand. And with the kids getting older, she added, we just don't want to have any regrets. We want them to see what a real family looks like. It's nice of you to say that, I said. Really? They smiled, and then Dawson said it. I was wondering, Mom, if at some point we could talk about how to move forward. Perhaps review some of the decisions that were made when things were strained, especially regarding estate matters. There it was, the velvet glove removed, the hand underneath reaching. I let the pause linger just long enough. Then I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope. Of course, I said, but I think it's best if we all have clarity. So I had something drawn up. I slid the envelope across the table. Mila's fingers twitched before she regained control. Dawson took it and opened it. Inside was a notarized addendum. It outlined the permanent establishment of the Daniela Lorenz Foundation, the non-profit organization I had created. It confirmed that the house I now lived in, the bank accounts, the trust funds, everything, was legally and irrevocably tied to the foundation. It listed the beneficiaries: a scholarship program for single mothers over 60, a care fund for victims of elder abuse, and a community medical aid project named after Archer. Dawson's face stiffened. Mila's smile cracked at the edges. You see, I said gently, I've been thinking about this a lot too. And I've realized I don't want to spend the rest of my life worrying about who deserves what, or who thinks they've earned a piece of something they never built. Dawson swallowed hard. I could see the heat behind his eyes. He held it back, trying to maintain control. I'm not cutting you off, I added. But I'm choosing peace, clarity, and protection. No one said anything. The children were frozen, confused, too young to understand the undercurrent, but old enough to feel the thick tension in the air. I stood up slowly. Dinner was wonderful. Thank you. Myla began to speak, but the words stumbled. She tried to smile again but gave up halfway. At the door, Dawson followed me. Is that it? He said in a low voice. I didn't stop walking. Mom, he said again, a little louder, a little sharper. We were trying to make things right. I finally turned around. No, I said. You were trying to regain access. He flinched. But what you lost was trust, and I don't hand that out like pie at Christmas. I got back in my car, exhaling. It was done. No shouting, no courtroom, just the truth. Documented, signed, sealed, and delivered. They had underestimated me, not just as a mother or a widow or an old woman. They had underestimated my memory, my resolve, my ability to plan. And now, for the first time in years, I slept that night without double-locking the door, because they couldn't reach me anymore. Not by law, not by lies, not by legacy. 3 days after that dinner, I woke to the sound of crunching gravel outside my window. I pulled the curtain aside just slightly, not enough to be seen. Dawson's car was in the driveway. He stayed in the driver's seat for a moment, then got out and paced a little, as if undecided about what he was doing here. It was still early, not even 8. The sea fog hadn't quite lifted. The dew sat on the window like a veil between me and whatever this was. I didn't open the door. He knocked once, then twice, softly, then left. 10 minutes later, a call came, unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The message was short, his voice quiet but strained. He said he respected my decision, that they would give me space, that they understood where I stood now. It felt almost civilized, almost, but by the afternoon I knew something had shifted. Amaya called, her voice tight. She had just received a call from someone she knew at the county court. Apparently, a new petition had been filed. Dawson and Myla were once again trying to challenge my mental competency, this time under a different clause. They were trying to use my foundation as proof that I was manipulated, financially exploited, that I couldn't possibly be acting with full mental clarity. I didn't flinch. Amaya asked if I wanted her to respond. I told her, no, not yet. Because sometimes you wait. You let people dig themselves deeper. You let the rope long enough to make the fall final. The next morning, I drove into town, not to see a lawyer, not to respond legally. I went to the bakery. Inside, the owner, Jackie, gave me a long look then smiled. She was 5 years older than me, walked with a cane, ran the shop with her granddaughter. We talked a few times about the community grant I had set up. I sat down with her and told her I had a proposal. That afternoon, we printed flyers. The next day, posters went up in libraries, clinics, homeless shelters.
Daniela Lorenz Foundation launches Community Days.
Free workshops, meals, counseling for older women re-entering the workforce, escaping isolation, protecting their assets. The event was held at the town hall, just 2 blocks from Dawson's insurance office. 200 people came. By the end of the week, the foundation was in the local paper, then a regional one, then a national blog for elder rights. I remained silent throughout. I didn't have to speak. Visibility was its own defense. On Friday, Rosalie stopped by. She had heard that Dawson and Myla were meeting with a second lawyer. Someone aggressive, someone loud. She warned me they wouldn't back down. I smiled. I thanked her, and then I handed her a set of documents. They weren't for me, they were for the foundation's board. People we had carefully chosen. None of them family. All of them strong. I had signed over the house, the remaining accounts, and even my name rights to the foundation's protective clause. That meant no matter what accusation was leveled against me, nothing could be liquidated or touched without the full consent of the board. Rosalie's eyes widened as she read it. You're sealing every door. I nodded. Let them try, I said. They're only proving my point. On Sunday, my doorbell rang again. This time, it was Myla. She held flowers, cheap ones. The kind you buy in a hurry at a gas station. Her eyes were soft, apologetic, but I had learned to see through softness. It could be a weapon, just like anger. She stepped into the living room when I didn't stop her. I didn't know you were filing another petition, she said. I swear, I waited. I just want us to be like we were before everything got complicated. She sat down, looking around the room as if trying to memorize it. Then came the next line. If there's anything we need to sign to show support, anything to put this behind us, we'll do it. And there it was. She hadn't come for reconciliation. She came to test the temperature. I stood up. She didn't move. I know what you're doing, I said calmly. And I want you to remember something. This house, this peace, this life. I built it without you. I survived everything you and Dawson did to me, and I did it in silence. Her face fell. I remained silent out of respect, but don't mistake silence for weakness. She stood up too now, her voice breaking. Dawson is falling apart. He's not. He's losing clients. He blames me.
I'm scarred.
I looked at her for a long moment. Then I said, not cruel, just finally.
Tats not my burden anymore.
She left. That night, I slept with the window open. I listened to the ocean, as I used to with Archer. And for the first time since all this began, I didn't feel like I was bracing for a blow. I felt finished, not defeated, complete, because there is a moment after the storm when silence returns, and it's not empty but earned. On Monday morning, I sensed a shift in the air. At first, it was subtle, just the way the neighborhood seemed quieter, as if holding its breath. Something was coming, and I knew it wouldn't be gentle. Amaya called shortly after noon. Her voice was calm but direct. The court date is set, she said. They pushed it through quickly. They're confident, but they made a mistake, Daniela, a big one. I didn't answer immediately. I knew Amaya well enough to wait. They filed evidence, she continued. Financial records, letters, emails, statements. She paused again, letting the silence emphasize what came next. They forged your signature. I sat perfectly still. She explained. The documents Dawson and Myla had filed claimed I had granted them power of attorney over the foundation, that I had transferred the right to amend its bylaws. It was brazen, reckless. They had fabricated an entire meeting, a board vote, even had it notarized. Amaya had already sent the file to the forensic examiner, but she didn't stop there. She had also had a quiet lunch over the weekend with one of the notaries they claimed had witnessed the document. He didn't recall the meeting. He didn't recall me, because it had never happened. That was the crack, and through that crack, everything unraveled. By Wednesday, the examiner's report was complete. Not only were the signatures inconsistent, but the timestamp metadata on the PDF files showed they had been sloppily backdated. One document was supposedly signed at a cafe in Camden, a place that had been permanently closed for renovations at the time. Another referred to a foundation board member who had resigned 3 months earlier. They hadn't just lied, they had been sloppy. That's when Amaya made her move. She filed a motion for fraud and perjury. She submitted the report, the notary's testimony, and a statement from the foundation's board chair. It was no longer just a response, it was a full-blown counterattack. But it didn't end there. A day later, the district attorney's office got involved. It turned out that attempting to defraud a registered non-profit organization wasn't just a civil matter. It could be a criminal offense. And because the foundation dealt with elder welfare, there was a second layer of protection. An automatic review had been triggered as soon as Amaya filed her countermotion. The district attorney's office wanted to talk. Meanwhile, I remained silent. I watered my plants.
I baket cornbread.
I walked on the beach every morning before the sun came up. But internally, I felt a change. No more anger, not even justice, just clarity. They had drawn the line, crossed it, painted it red, and now the town would see. The hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning. I arrived early, sitting in the second row with Amaya beside me. The courtroom was modest, nothing like on television, just cold air and wooden benches and the quiet murmur of anticipation. Dawson sat 3 rows ahead of me with Myla. Neither of them looked back. The judge was swift. He reviewed the evidence, allowed brief statements. Amaya, always composed, laid everything out. Clean, factual, undeniable. She didn't even have to raise her voice. The forensics, the witness, the timelines, all of it. When Dawson's lawyer had his turn, he stammered, tried to claim I had verbally approved it, that I had memory issues, that I had misunderstood. Amaya simply held up the clinic reports showing I had passed a full cognitive assessment just a month prior, the same report they themselves had submitted in an earlier motion to argue I had the capacity to make decisions they disagreed with. They had contradicted themselves in writing, twice. The judge called a recess. Outside, I stood on the courthouse steps while Amaya spoke with the representative from the district attorney's office. The sun was bright, but I welcomed it. Let it warm the top of my head, let it fill the silence. Then I heard it. Mom. I turned around. Dawson was walking toward me, alone. His face was drawn, paler than I remembered, his voice softer. "You're really going through with this," he said. I looked at him. "No," I said, "you did this." His shoulders sagged, as if he realized for the first time that he couldn't push it back on me. "I didn't think it would come to this," he mumbled. I nodded. That's the thing about boundaries. Once you cross them, you don't get to decide where they end. He looked like he wanted to say more, but his mouth closed instead. Amaya stepped beside me. "We should go back in." We did. When the judge returned, he didn't hesitate. Motion granted. The forged documents were dismissed as invalid. The foundation bylaws were protected. A referral to the district attorney's office for further investigation had been made, and with that, it was over, at least in the eyes of the court. But for me, it was something deeper. I had stood before a system that once ignored women like me, dismissed our voices, assumed we were too frail or confused or overly emotional, and I had been heard. I didn't win because I screamed louder. I won because I refused to look away. I won because I kept my records, spoke my truth, and trusted that silence would do its work. That night, I sat on the porch with Amaya and Rosalie. We shared peach pie and let the breeze blow in. None of us said much. We didn't have to. The truth had spoken for us, and for once, it had been enough. 2 days after the verdict, I walked through my garden with shears in hand. The air was crisp with the first hint of autumn, and the sun sat lower, bathing everything in amber. The lavender bushes had grown wild again. I trimmed them gently, bunch by bunch, letting the scent fill the quiet space around me. This is how I always returned to myself, through something ordinary. Amaya had called earlier that morning. Her tone was different now, lighter, even warm. "The district attorney's office is moving forward," she said. "Formal charges, fraud, forgery, attempted embezzlement of non-profit assets. 3 counts." I thanked her, but inside there was no burst of joy, no triumphant fist in the air, just the quiet weight of inevitability. This was never about revenge. It was about truth, about being seen, heard, and holding my ground when every part of me had been dismissed. Dawson hadn't called since the hearing. No message, no letter, not a single sign of remorse. I imagined him sitting in his house, blinds drawn, phone in hand, trying to formulate a sentence that wouldn't make him look small, but there was none.
Ze silence Said Enouk.
Myla had been spotted leaving town. Rosalie saw her packing boxes from the back of her SUV behind the old bakery. No farewell, no public apology, just a quiet retreat. That's how it always was with people like her. They disappeared when the mirrors were turned on them. Later that afternoon, Rosalie came by. She brought a box of old photos she had salvaged from the storage unit I once shared with Dawson. I hadn't asked her to. She just did. We sat at the kitchen table, sifting through memories. My wedding day, Dawson as a toddler clinging to my leg with that stubborn pout. Christmas in the White Mountains when the power went out and we lit the whole cabin with candles. I looked at these pictures not with bitterness, but with distance, like artifacts from someone else's life. A version of me who had believed love, effort, and loyalty could bend anyone toward goodness. Rosalie found a photo I hadn't seen in years. It was from my 50th birthday, taken on the patio of our old lakeside house. My husband stood beside me, his arm around my shoulder. Dawson stood behind him, beaming. We had just finished a round of grilled salmon. I remembered thinking in that exact moment how happy I was. I pressed the photo flat on the table and stared at it. Not in sorrow, but in reflection. That woman, that version of me, had no idea how quickly that warmth would turn, how thin the line between affection and entitlement could be. But she wasn't wrong to hope, she wasn't wrong to love, she was just unprepared. By dusk, I had made a decision. The community center called the next morning, confirming the room for the event. I had decided to host a gathering for the foundation's beneficiaries and partners. No gala, nothing fancy, just a quiet celebration, a thank you, a circle of resilience. Amaya offered to help with logistics. She was already drafting the press release. News agencies had picked up the story since the court ruling. Elderly woman wins battle over forged non-profit control, the headlines read. But that wasn't the story, not really. The story was about what happens when people assume you'll stay quiet because of your age, when they forget that years don't weaken you, they sharpen you. I visited the foundation's new office that afternoon. It was smaller than the old one, but more purposeful. A few of the younger volunteers were there, painting the walls a soft sage green. A woman named Sawyer had just moved from another state to work full-time on our rural support program. She hugged me tightly when I walked in. "You saved this place," she said. I smiled, but inside I knew the truth. No, I had simply refused to let it be stolen. Back home, I sat by the window and wrote a letter, not to Dawson, not to the court but to myself. A letter that began with, "I am not broken," and ended with, "Oh, and I won't disappear," because that's what this whole ordeal had tried to do, to erase me, to overwrite me with legal tricks and whispered doubts. But I remained, I stood, I let the fire rise, and I didn't run from it. The next day, my neighbor stopped me at the mailbox. "Daniela," he said. "My wife and I read the article. What you did, that was something." I thanked him and walked on. Not because I wasn't touched, but because I had spent enough time letting other people's opinions define my worth.
Now, I valket at my own pace.
That evening, the sky opened with rain, steady, not violent. I made myself tea and wrapped myself in a quilt sewn decades ago, and I felt something I hadn't felt in months.
Silence.
It wasn't peace, not entirely, but it was the beginning of it. I thought of all the women I had met at the center. The single mothers, the grandmothers raising grandchildren, the widows starting over at 70. We weren't fragile, we weren't relics. We were survivors with memories long enough to outlast betrayal. And I was one of them, not broken, not bitter, just awake. 3 weeks after the verdict, I stood on the small stage in the new community center, holding a microphone with hands that no longer trembled. Before me were almost 100 faces. Some I knew well, some I had helped through hard winters or long divorces or lonely birthdays. Some I had never met, but they were there because the foundation had reached them in some way. That was enough. The room wasn't fancy. Folding chairs, coffee urns on plastic tables, a few old ceiling fans humming overhead. But the walls were freshly painted and lined with photos from our programs. Women learning trades, elder care volunteers hugging patients, children laughing next to packed donation boxes. I hadn't prepared a speech. I didn't want to perform. I just spoke the truth. "This organization was never about money," I said slowly, pausing to steady my breath. "It was about not being erased, about proving that the second half of your life can be just as powerful as the first. Perhaps even more so." They applauded, but I didn't let the moment linger. I handed the microphone to Sawyer and stepped off the stage. She was the future now, her voice, her leadership, her energy. I had built the bones. They would carry the rest. After the event, people stayed. Some cried, some hugged me. One woman slipped me a note that simply said, "Because of you, I filed for guardianship of my grandson." I tucked the note into my coat pocket and left through the back door. The sun had already set. Autumn was giving way to early winter. I could smell the coming frost. When I got home, the porch light was on. Rosalie had left a casserole at the door with a napkin taped to it. Rest.
Juvi irnet it.
Inside, I lit the fireplace and poured myself a small glass of wine. The house, once too quiet, now felt like a sanctuary. Dawson never reached out. For a long time, I had imagined a grand apology, a tearful phone call, a letter filled with regret, but it never came. Instead, a package arrived from his lawyer. Inside was a signed settlement form, releasing all remaining claims to the foundation or any property still in my name. No note, no explanation. He had chosen silence instead of redemption. I accepted it, not because I forgave him, but because I didn't need anything from him anymore. His chapter in my life had closed long ago. He just hadn't noticed until the door slammed shut behind him. The next morning, I donated the last of his childhood mementos to the local thrift store. Not out of anger, just out of clarity. Some things don't need to be kept. They need to be let go. In the following days, I started walking every morning. 3 miles at sunrise, sometimes alone, sometimes with neighbors who quietly joined me. We never talked about what had happened. We didn't have to. They had followed it in the newspapers, on TV, through whispers in the supermarket aisles. But walking with them was a kind of unspoken respect, and that was more valuable than any apology. One morning, on the path behind the orchard, I saw a young woman sitting on a bench with her child. She looked tired, as if the world had sat too long on her chest. As I passed, she stopped me. "You're Daniela, right, the woman who fought back?" I smiled softly. "I'm Daniela, but I didn't fight back. I just refused to disappear." Her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. That was it. No more words. That afternoon, I planted 3 new apple trees at the edge of my garden. I don't know if I'll live to see them bear fruit, but planting something you may never harvest is an act of faith, not in yourself, but in the world after you. Rosalie visited me again that weekend. We drank tea, laughed about the news report that mispronounced her name, and talked about hosting a writing workshop for retired women next spring. "Stories," she said, "are the last thing they can't steal." As she left, I stood at the window, watching the wind move through the trees, the kind of wind that doesn't knock things down, but reminds you they can stand. I didn't disappear. I rebuilt. I redefined, and I remained whole. If you have ever felt dismissed, erased, or underestimated, simply because of your age, your silence, or your kindness, know this. You still have the power to draw the line, reclaim your space, plant something new. If my story touched a part of your heart today, subscribe to Clara's Stories and share this with someone who needs to hear it too. Or simply take a deep breath and remember, you're not done. You're not invisible. You're still writing your story. And perhaps, it's just beginning. These stories can only live on with your support. If you enjoyed what you heard, please consider a small donation so we can continue to share voices like this with you. Every contribution helps. Thank you.